Recording. So welcome everyone to the Contractor Journey webcast series on managing subs better for project managers. Today we're talking about subcontractor compliance during the construction phase. The Contractor Journey breaks the process into key phases of a construction project with several business processes under each phase. If you look down the middle of the slide, you can see building profits, project by project, business development, bidding, pre-construction, construction, and post. Normally, we think of pre-construction, construction, and post as the normal phases of a construction project. However, we realized that pre-construction was kind of a catch-all, including a lot of very important business processes. So we broke those business processes out. So underneath each of these 6 phases are a bunch of business processes, and within each one of those, we define the process itself, the basics of that process, best practices, tips, things to watch out for, and solutions for that process. If you look on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see an infographic of the contractor journey. You could also see a version of it on the contractorjourney.com and then click on see the infographic or see the diagram. I can't remember exactly what that link is, but the contractorjourney.com, all one word. This webcast series is put on by Sage Construction Group, and we're looking at the subcontractor compliance today. My name is Phil Bride, and we'll be going through the best practices, tips, and things to watch out for on subcontractor compliance. During this session, we're going to cover how the IRS defines a subcontractor, the paperwork required, selection of a sub, risk areas, and the 6 best practices of subcontractor compliance. So according to the IRS, the difference between an employee and a subcontractor depends on your right to direct and control the worker. As we all know, a subcontractor gets a 1099, employees get W-2s. But it's a little more complicated than that. The IRS will take a look at how you treat the employee, and they'll decide whether they're really a 1099 or W-2, regardless of what you call them. So in determining employment tax status of workers, the IRS considers 3 categories of evidence. The big thing is that a 1099 or a subcontractor can't work in your company. So that means behavioral control is very important category of evidence. So if you train the person, tell them how to do their job, tell them when they need to show up on the job, when they can take lunch breaks, when they can leave, and you supply materials for them, even if they buy their own tools. They're probably an employee, whether you have them on 1099 or not. Next one is financial control. If they have a significant investment in their own equipment, in their own tools, and they're responsible for their taxes and insurance, if they pay for their own expenses that are not reimbursed, especially high non-reimbursed expenses, and they manage their own P&L as if they're a company, which 1099s are, and they can direct activities that affect their pay, then they're a contractor. Anything short of that, and they're probably an employee. And it's interesting because bigger companies tend to hire, quote unquote, hire 1099 employees. And I've heard recently that one large company has a lawsuit against them over this very topic. Smaller companies are easier marks for the IRS to go after because we don't have large contingents of lawyers on staff and deep pockets. So they go after the easy marks, us. So it behooves us to pay attention to this, to what is the definition of a subcontractor and an employee. So another indicator of whether they're a subcontractor or employee, is relationships of the parties. Are there employee benefits? Is there a written contract? Is the relationship in accordance with the person being an employee or a contractor? And then, and the IRS does audits, as we all know, and they do audits and specifically pay attention to this topic often. And it's the 78 Revenue Act indicates 2 tests to determine whether they're employees or not. One of the first test is the consistency test. Have you consistently filed 1099s for all workers doing the same task in the same manner? And then the reasonable basis test. And this is, do you have a court case to back you up? Or maybe a prior IRS audit that you came out on top of? Those are big deals, and that's part of the reasonable basis test. Doesn't sound reasonable to me, but for the IRS it is. Don't ignore the paperwork. It is a necessary evil, especially if you want to stay in business in the long run, and if you want your subs to stay in business in the long run. Government compliance audits are on the rise, especially in the construction industry, and they're on the rise around all kinds of things. They will come in and check your subs for compliance issues, and it could put your projects at risk, and it could put, heck, you at risk too, if your subs are doing things not quite above board. So one of the big ones is the Form I-9. And these audits are on the rise by the feds, and that's for illegal aliens. It's for citizenship certification, or to ensure citizenship, or that they legally can work in the U.S. So the IRS or government compliance, they're going after these things because they're easy to do. And the big reason why they're easy to find fault is because on average, the feds find an average of 5 mistakes on each form, and the cost is between $100 and $1,000 per violation. So it could be $500 to $5,000 per form, per employee. And if your subs are messing up on this, they could get hit with big fines and put your jobs at risk. So there's some common mistakes on these forms, and that's requesting too much or too little information, or the form just has missing key information. And by the way, the employer is not allowed to fill in data in Section 1. That's a huge violation. That will be probably the highest highest fee violation. Re-verify all the form data, especially when documentation expires. And then these I-9s have to be kept for 1 year after employment or 3 years after the date of hire. So you got lots of paperwork to keep. And what I just found out recently is there are changes in the I-9 as of July this year by the USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. It's their second one this year. And so they're not big changes, but they are changes. And guess what? Changes, and if it's done wrong, that's a violation, and a fee goes with it. So even though GCs are not responsible for the subs I-9s, you are responsible for your employees, and you're responsible for the success of the job. And if you've got subs that are out of compliance and getting nailed with these violations, you ought to know, and you ought to help these guys keep it on track. A lot of times, as we know, subs are one-man companies, or maybe they're 2 or 3, or they're smaller. They can be smaller, and they're just not organized around this. Even if they're 15 or 20, they might have a bunch of people working without the I-9s in place properly. So auditors now have online access to resources such as state license boards to determine if subs are properly licensed, insured, and what they're doing is they're on the hunt for violations. They're actually out there hunting down violations, and that could put your jobs at risk. Insurance companies don't want to pay any more than they have to on claims and are tightening their rules to reduce their own risk. So they look for workers' comp experience modifiers. If you're not familiar with this, it's a ratio. One a ratio of 1 means it's industry average, and your workers' comp premium is just what it is. If it's higher than 1, you're going to pay over the normal premium. You're going to and if it's under 1, you get a discount. So insurance companies are looking for this workers' comp experience modifier of less than 1, and that means you have less claims than the industry average on workers' comp. And if your subs are over 1, they're paying more on premiums, and they're having more risk put on risk, and they're having more claims against them, which in some states, not all states, but some states, that risk, if an injury happens on your job site, will flow up. Even if they're a subcontractor, will flow up to the general contractor, and it'll be up to you to pay for it and make it right. Surety agents are also looking beyond the financials to consider and analyze how well you run your business, and how well you manage subcontractors and suppliers, and how well subs manage their business. They're looking for business acumen. Do they know how to run a business? Do they know how to put projects in place with goals and values and delegation? And do they know how to run their business well so that they'll be in business in 5 years, in 10 years, and without violations and getting hit over the head by the feds? So they look at things like DART rates, the days away, reassignments, and transfers. Somebody gets injured, so that gets folded into the DART rate. And also the AM Best in Company rating for the insurance companies that you guys, both the GCs and the subs, have. So not all insurance companies are rated well, meaning they don't pay out as well. And some sureties for larger bonds want an AM rating of your insurance companies and your subs at a certain level, or else you have to get new insurance to get the bond. So some important tips to keep in mind when selecting subs, and of course you document and keep this. We did cover this in detail during the sub pre-qual session on Monday, but I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. The topics you see on the left in the slide: experience, accountability, business management, litigation. There are questions that can be tied to all this for sub pre-qual. And so the big question is, how do you rate the subs on these topics? What kind of details below each topic are you really looking for? What's the criteria you have in place on each of these? What processes do you have to keep it up to date? Because things change. And do you track it? Do you track it on a regular basis? There's a lot involved in it. It's not rocket science, but there's a lot involved in it. Often we just want to know if they have experience doing the kind of job we want them to work on. But there are other things like, do they have a litigation history? Do they have workers, their workers' comp modifier, is it too high? Are their certifications expired? Things like that. Do they have business processes to manage WIP and manage multiple projects, or are they just a single project, single GC kind of sub, which might put them at risk and you at risk, by the way. And all kinds. So I'm not going to go into it any further than that. There are 3 main risk areas to pay attention to for sub-compliance. The first one, uninsured workers. Most states require coverage for uninsured workers, and some states even hold the general contractor liable for a sub's workers' comp if injured on your site. Not all states, so it behooves you to check what's the situation in your own state. I'm not even sure what it is in Oregon, but nonetheless, I'm not a GC. I actually do some work as a sub on the side, as well as business processes. Lien waivers. Understand the when and where of lien waivers. So when you waive any future lien rights to the property, usually when you're paid. Make sure your subs understand it, and not only understand it, but they have enough cash to get through the project. If it's pay at the end of the project, or pay the they'll get paid when you get paid. That can be a big deal. Certified payroll. Government, as we know, government public works projects require the weekly certified payroll reports for all workers, including subs, including 1099s on the job. But the big deal is the U.S. Department of Labor requires that you pay prevailing wages, and you have to prove that you pay the prevailing wages. So I've recently looked up prevailing wages in my state, and it's a fairly easy way to look it up. You can jump on to Google, look up prevailing wages, your state name, and hopefully your state has this too, but at least in Oregon, a nice PDF popped up, and they update it twice a year, and you just look through it until you find the prevailing wage for the particular county and a job type, labor type, and there it is. There's the number with a couple of variations, and you've got it. So pretty straightforward. There are 6 common best practices for subcontractor compliance. And this is from CFMA, the Construction Financial Management Association. The first is create a culture of compliance. Make sure your team understands the importance of compliance and the negative impact it has on the company if violations occur. And that negative impact, of course, is the fees and penalties that you'll have to pay. To be successful, support for compliance initiatives really have to start with the executive team, the guys in charge, the GM, the owner, whoever is the top guy in the company. Delegation, the only way delegation really works is if you delegate, you make it clear, you set up clear goals, and monitor it on a very frequent basis, sometimes daily, sometimes, and definitely weekly. Monitor the progress of getting this compliance in place. So many times we hear just people getting assigned something, someone it's their part-time. Just go figure out what compliance is, get the processes in place, and come back and tell us, and then we forget about it. That's not good enough. If you're serious about compliance, that's just not good enough. It's kind of like sending a guy out onto a project and going, just go figure it out. We don't really want to hear anything back from you, just that the job's done. You'd never do that. You'd want to know what the status of the project from your project managers, probably on a weekly, if not daily basis. So same thing with projects for business processes too. Here's an interesting piece, and that is don't let your project managers overrule the accounting department's decision to not pay a sub if all the required documents are not received. So many times the project managers don't talk. Sometimes they may not even know who the accounting manager is. Of course, they probably do know who they are, but they don't talk to them on a regular basis about project status and what's happening. So get that communication going, and that's key for compliance, because the project manager wants to stay on schedule, get the project done, and the accounting manager wants to stay compliant. And those are two different things, so they have to coordinate very tightly together. Next big thing is to understand the rules. Work with an attorney or compliance expert to stay on top of the latest regulations. Check in for compliance advice at least annually. Here in Oregon, we've got all kinds of compliance and rules and regs getting passed each year, where things are changing. I've heard recently that there's an initiative. I'm not sure it's law yet, but it got passed. It's being considered where you have to have a certain number of apprentices for skilled labor, very specific skilled labor jobs. You have to have a certain percentage of apprentices working with that master on that type of work on each job, certain number of hours, certain number of apprentices, and they specify it out. I'm not sure they're watching it closely yet, but probably in 2018 they'll watch it very closely, and of course send people out onto the job to watch it. But that's here in Oregon. Just keep track of what's going on in your state. Oops, sorry about that. So develop a process that automates as many of these steps as possible. And one of the big things is keeping on top of today's compliance. It's virtually impossible if you're handling all the paperwork manually. It's there can be just so much. It can be overwhelming, and so develop a process that you can automate as many of the steps as possible. But like all automation, it's always best to have a process in place first and then automate that process. To try to invent the process or learn the process as you're automating it at the same time, you're taking on too much, and it's too painful. I've been around business processes, software, and all this stuff for a long time, and I can't tell you how many failed projects happened because this step was skipped. Learning the process after the automation was put in place doesn't work. Doesn't work well. It's like asking an accountant to learn accounting after you buy the accounting system. No, the accountants learn accounting first and then come in and learn the system. So develop a process that automates these steps, including ways to prevent paying subs before you receive proof of insurance, lien waivers, certified payroll reports, whatever's required. And then other compliance processes to automate might include things like permits, licenses, closeout documents would be a big one. Integrate your project management and accounting systems. Get this communication going between project managers and accountants, and just get it working well, and then the automation of it will work out much more smoothly. And getting it synchronized, making sure the project managers understand the compliance issues and the accountants understand the schedule issues that the project managers have to deal with. Monitor this compliance daily. Yeah, that sounds like a pain in the rear end, but for added protection, set up an automated alert system that warns you of subcontractor compliance problems, maybe expired workers' comp or liability insurance, expired licenses, things like that, ahead of the expiration dates. That way you can do something about it. And today's advanced software systems offer this kind of capability. No need to pick up the phone and call people or send emails back and forth. Just set up this alert system, get this compliance process in place, track it, and be on top of it. So this last one is a really an interesting one, and that is conduct your own audit. So why wait for a formal audit where the penalty fees could be high? So once you've set up your compliance process, conduct a random spot check of the process every 3 months, 6 months, maybe once a year. So it's too often contractors assume a process is working just because it's in place. It's like if you're a coach of a football team, you had 1 week of practice during the summer, and then you're waiting for the game in September, and no practices in between, no practice games. It's like, no, you'd never do that in sports. Why would you do that for your business? You got to run it like the sports analogy is really good. I often find it hard to find where the analogy breaks down. It's a bunch of skills, it's a bunch of processes, it's a bunch of ways we do things. You're basically running a play with a compliance issue, and you got to practice it. You got to know what's going on. So a random audit helps you easily spot the problems, correct them before they put your company at risk, and there's hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of fees to pay. So what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes and talk a little bit about some of the solutions available for compliance from Sage. And Sage has a product called My Assistant, works with Sage 300, and My Assistant is My Assistant can set up alerts, can set up alerts and collect information out of 300 that you put into it, of course, for the compliance process. There are other tools like bid management in Sage Construction Project Center. And within bid management, you can set up sub pre-qual, and you can set up also manage all the documentation within that. The bid management piece is cloud-based, and it works with both 100 and 300. And then we've got paperless construction, where you can store documents, store all kinds of documents, and pick them up at a moment's notice. And in fact, you can work through a whole AP process within Sage Paperless Construction. So if you'd like more information on any of these products, drop me a quick email, phil@philbride.com, and or scott.readers@sage.com. Drop us an email, and we'd be happy to set up a more in-depth demo for any of these products around subcontractor compliance, and get you set up so you can learn more about how to solutions around processes that I hope you either have in place, are putting in place, or refining. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this webcast. It's the last of the 3 webcast series in the contractor journey on managing subs better. And the 3 webcasts are sub pre-qual, bid management, and subcontractor compliance. We do this every month, and in fact, next month we're moving from bid management to project management as part of the 3. So stay tuned, watch your emails, and with that, thanks again from Phil Bride. If you'd like more information about what I do, I'm a contractor. I'm a subcontractor, a business consultant on contract with Sage on business processes. And so I work with construction companies and others to help them get their business processes straightened out and working well. It's all about the execution. Feel free to give me a call. And you can also contact me, and I'll get you set up with product demos through Sage or one of their partners. Thanks again. Have a great day, and Merry Christmas.